The citation appeared on Marcus Brennan's dock at 6:15 a.m., laminated and official-looking, demanding he remove his unauthorized nautical lighting within 72 hours or face a $500 fine. Marcus, a 52-year-old electrical engineer who'd inherited this lakefront property from his grandfather, stood there in his work boots with his coffee growing cold, reading the notice for the third time. 4 months. 4 months since Patricia Hendricks had been elected HOA president, and this was the 6th violation notice he'd received for things that had existed on this property for 3 decades. His grandfather's weather vane, his dock's traditional lantern, his mailbox design. But this one was different. This one made Marcus smile for the first time in weeks, because Patricia had just made a mistake that would cost her more than she could possibly imagine. What the self-appointed queen of Clearwater Estates didn't know was that the utility company providing power to every single home in this development, including the electricity running to her heated driveway and her landscape lighting, wasn't just some distant corporation. Marcus owned it, and tonight, Patricia Hendricks was about to learn exactly who held the real power around here. Where are you from? Tell us in the comments below. And if you're loving this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales of justice served. Now, let's see exactly how this unfolded. This is a story in 3 parts. The violation that pushed a reasonable man past his breaking point, the confrontation where the balance of power shifted completely, and the resolution where an entitled bully learned that some people you simply don't mess with. The first part takes you through months of systematic harassment disguised as rule enforcement. You'll feel Marcus's frustration as a woman with no authority, beyond a neighborhood committee, slowly chipped away at his family heritage, demanding changes to a property that existed long before her development's rules were written. Every polite conversation ignored. Every reasonable explanation dismissed. Every attempt at peaceful resolution met with smug superiority. Until the morning Marcus realized that Patricia's latest citation had handed him the perfect opportunity to teach her a lesson she'd never forget. The second part reveals the confrontation that changed everything. The emergency HOA meeting Patricia called, certain she'd finally break the stubborn engineer who refused to bow to her authority. The moment Marcus walked in with a file folder that made the color drain from her face, the revelation of documents she never knew existed, and the identity behind the corporate name on every utility bill in Clearwater Estates. You'll witness the exact second Patricia understood she'd been writing citations to the man who literally controlled the power flowing into her home. The third part delivers the justice everyone was waiting for. How Marcus used his leverage not for petty revenge, but to dismantle years of Patricia's overreach. The unexpected allies who emerged once someone finally stood up to her. The board meeting where residents discovered just how many questionable decisions their president had been making. And the perfect resolution that restored peace to the neighborhood while teaching one entitled woman that authority without wisdom is just tyranny waiting to be toppled. Here's exactly how it happened. Marcus Brennan had never planned to own an electrical utility company. The 52-year-old electrical engineer had inherited Brennan Power Solutions 15 years ago when his father passed, a small private utility serving 3 lakefront developments totaling 200 homes. Marcus ran it efficiently with a staff of 8, maintaining infrastructure his grandfather had built in 1962 when Clearwater Lake was just farmland and fishing spots. The company had always been in the family, passed down through 3 generations of Brennans who believed in fair rates and reliable service. Marcus himself lived in the original Brennan family home, a modest but beautiful lakefront property at 847 Lakeshore Drive, the first house built on Clearwater Lake. His grandfather had constructed it in 1959, 3 years before founding the utility company to bring power to the growing community. The property featured a classic wooden dock extending 60 feet into the lake, crowned with a traditional ship's lantern that had guided boats safely for decades. Marcus worked long hours managing the utility, often leaving at dawn and returning after dark, but he cherished this property. It was his connection to his family's legacy. Every board and beam carried memories of his grandfather teaching him to fish, his father showing him how to maintain the dock. 3 generations of Brennan men standing on these same weathered planks, watching sunsets over water. Patricia Hendricks had moved into Clearwater Estates exactly 4 years ago, purchasing a newly constructed 5,000-square-foot lakefront McMansion 3 properties down from Marcus. She'd immediately joined the HOA, then systematically climbed to vice president within 18 months. When the previous president resigned due to her constant undermining, Patricia seized control with the enthusiasm of someone who finally found a kingdom to rule. Her first act was commissioning new aesthetic guidelines that somehow applied retroactively to existing properties. Marcus's first citation arrived 3 weeks after Patricia's election, demanding he remove his grandfather's copper weather vane for being non-conforming decorative roofing elements. He politely explained the weather vane predated the HOA by 40 years. Patricia had smiled tightly and said rules were rules. 2 weeks later, another citation appeared for his mailbox. A sturdy wooden post his father had built, now deemed insufficiently modern for the neighborhood standards. Marcus replaced it, choosing his battles carefully. Then came citations for his dock stain color, his garden shed placement, his window trim paint shade. Each violation notice featured Patricia's signature. Each demanded immediate compliance. Each chipped away at the property his family had built with their own hands. The morning of September 17th marked the breaking point. Marcus had worked a 16-hour shift, dealing with storm damage to power lines serving the northern developments. He arrived home at dawn exhausted, only to find the laminated citation flapping against his dock post. Violation notice 2024847-006. Unauthorized nautical lighting exceeding approved lumens for waterfront properties. Removal required within 72 hours. Non-compliance fine, $500. The dock lantern his grandfather had installed in 1961, the same lantern that appeared in faded Kodachrome photos of his father as a boy. The light that had welcomed Marcus home from college, from his wedding, from his father's funeral. Patricia wanted it gone because it was 12 lumens brighter than her newly invented standard. Marcus stood there as sunrise painted the lake gold, and something fundamental shifted in his chest. This wasn't about rules or aesthetics. This was about erasing his family's history to satisfy one woman's need for control. He'd tried reasoning with Patricia before. Of course, after the 3rd citation, he'd attended an HOA meeting and calmly explained his property's historical significance. Patricia had interrupted him, voice dripping with condescension, to inform him that grandfather clauses aren't a real thing in this community. Other residents had shifted uncomfortably, but no one challenged her. When Marcus mentioned his family had built half the original infrastructure around the lake, Patricia had actually laughed. "Mr. Brennan, if you can't follow simple neighborhood guidelines, perhaps Clearwater Estates isn't the right fit for you." The room had gone silent. Several longtime residents stared at their laps, unwilling to confront Patricia's reign. Marcus had left that meeting humiliated and furious, but he'd still hoped for a reasonable resolution. He'd even tried calling Patricia directly, offering to meet and discuss the violations. She told him she didn't negotiate with residents who thought themselves above community standards, then hung up. The police weren't an option since HOA disputes were civil matters. His attorney had advised that fighting each citation individually would cost more than compliance, but this dock light citation changed everything. Marcus sat at his home office desk that evening. The violation notice spread before him and opened his laptop. He began pulling files he hadn't reviewed in years. Property deeds, utility service contracts, the original development agreements his grandfather had signed with Clearwater Estates founder, corporate registration documents. By midnight, Marcus had assembled a complete picture of something Patricia clearly had never researched. The anonymous Brennan Power Solutions that appeared on every utility bill in Clearwater Estates wasn't some distant corporation. The company board consisted of exactly one person, Marcus Brennan himself. Every home in Patricia's domain, including her own address at 892 Lakeshore Drive, depended on infrastructure Marcus personally maintained. And more interesting, the original development agreement his grandfather had signed included specific clauses about the Brennan family property, clauses that predated Patricia's HOA by 4 decades. Marcus spent the next 3 weeks preparing, researching Patricia's background, documenting every citation, gathering witness statements from intimidated neighbors, and consulting with his attorney about the nuclear option he was considering. If Patricia wanted to play property rights games, Marcus would show her what real property rights looked like. If she wanted to flex authority, he'd demonstrate actual power. And on October 8th, when Patricia sent out the notice for an emergency HOA meeting specifically to discuss the Brennan property compliance issues, Marcus received it with a grim smile. Everything was finally ready. Patricia had just provided the perfect stage for her own education. The emergency HOA meeting convened at 7 p.m. sharp in the Clearwater Estates clubhouse. Patricia Hendricks sat at the head table, flanked by her board of carefully selected yes-men. Treasurer Donald Webb, a retired accountant who rarely spoke, and Secretary Jennifer Mills, a young real estate agent terrified of contradicting Patricia. Approximately 40 residents filled the folding chairs, an unusually large turnout driven by curiosity about Patricia's dramatic email promising final action regarding ongoing property violations. Patricia wore her power outfit, a navy blazer and pearl necklace, her highlighted blonde hair perfectly styled. She'd arranged the room like a courtroom, with Marcus's chair positioned front and center, isolated from other residents. She began with her usual speech about community standards and property values, building toward her grand finale about residents who thought themselves exempt from rules. Then she called Marcus to stand and address his violations. He stood slowly, setting a manila folder on the table before him, and Patricia's smile widened. She loved this moment, the public submission she believed was coming. Marcus opened his folder with deliberate care, his voice calm and measured when he finally spoke. Before we discuss my alleged violations, I'd like to address some facts about Clearwater Estates that seem to have been forgotten. He pulled out the first document, a yellow property deed from 1959. The land we're sitting on right now was sold to my grandfather, Thomas Brennan, by the McKinley family farm. Lot 1, Clearwater Lake Development. My family's property was the first structure built here, which means it predates this HOA's founding by 41 years. Patricia waved dismissively, but her smile had tightened. Marcus continued, sliding another document across the table toward her. This is the original development agreement signed by my grandfather and Howard Carlson, the developer who built Clearwater Estates in 1983. Section 7 specifically grandfathers all existing structures on Lot 1, protecting them from future regulation. Patricia picked up the document, her face flushing as she scanned it. "This is irrelevant," she snapped. "The current HOA covenant supersedes." Marcus cut her off with a shake of his head, producing another document. "Actually, Mrs. Hendricks, it doesn't. The current covenant, which you're holding up as absolute authority, includes a specific reference to pre-existing agreements. Your attorney should have caught this during your election." The room had gone completely silent, but Marcus wasn't finished. He pulled out his third document, and this one made Patricia go pale. "Now, let's discuss Brennan Power Solutions, the utility company that appears on everyone's monthly bill here." He held up the corporate registration certificate, his name clearly listed as owner and CEO. "That would be my company, the one my grandfather founded in 1962 to electrify this area. The same company that currently provides power to every single home in Clearwater Estates under a 50-year service contract that renews automatically unless terminated by the property. Owners, that's all of you with 6 months. Notice and majority vote." Patricia's mouth opened, then closed. Jennifer Mills looked confused. Donald Webb was reading the document Marcus had slid toward him, his eyes widening. Marcus pressed forward, his engineer's precision cutting through Patricia's bluster like a blade. Let me be specific about your property, Mrs. Hendricks, since you seem interested in specific violations. Your home at 892 Lakeshore Drive, 5,200 square feet, currently drawing an average of 847 kilowatt hours per month. That heated driveway you installed last winter without HOA approval, by the way, adds about 320 kilowatt hours during operation. Your landscape lighting, which runs on a timer from dusk to midnight, violates your own lumens restriction by approximately 40%. And those security spotlights you added facing my property last month are creating light pollution that technically breaches county ordinances. Patricia finally found her voice, though it came out strangled. You're threatening to cut my power? That's illegal. Marcus shook his head calmly. I'm not threatening anything, Mrs. Hendricks. I'm simply pointing out that you've been writing citations to someone whose family built the infrastructure you depend on for violations of rules that don't legally apply to my property, while simultaneously violating those same rules yourself. He pulled out a thick stack of papers, dropping them on the table with a satisfying thud. These are witness statements from 17 residents documenting your selective enforcement of HOA rules. Mr. Patterson at 823. Lakeshore has landscape lighting identical to mine that you've never cited. Mrs. Chun at 901 has a dock light actually brighter than mine. No citations. The Johnsons at 878 have a mailbox style you ban, but they're on your board's approved contractor list, so you've ignored it. He looked directly at Patricia, his voice hardening. You've been using HOA authority not to maintain standards, but to harass the one resident who refused to kiss your ring. Marcus laid out his ultimatum with the precision of an engineer presenting a blueprint. Here's what's going to happen, Mrs. Hendricks. First, you will immediately void every citation you've issued against my property, acknowledging they were issued in error due to the pre-existing agreement you failed to research. Second, you will issue a written apology to me and to this community for wasting everyone's time with your personal vendetta. Third, you will step down as HOA president, effective tonight. Patricia shot to her feet. Absolutely not. You can't force me to. Marcus held up his hand. Option 2 is that I distribute copies of these documents to every resident here, along with a breakdown of your own violations, evidence of your selective enforcement, and a recommendation that Clearwater Estates terminate its service contract with Brennan Power Solutions and seek a new provider, given that the nearest alternative utility would require each household to pay approximately $8,000 in connection fees, plus rates about 30% higher than what my family has been charging for decades. I suspect that might generate some interesting discussion about your leadership. The room erupted. Residents began talking over each other, demanding to see the documents, asking questions about their utility rates, several people pulling out phones to photograph Marcus's evidence. Jennifer Mills was frantically reading the development agreement, her face white. Donald Webb had actually stood and moved away from Patricia, physically distancing himself from the imploding president. Patricia stood frozen, her carefully constructed authority crumbling in real time. You planned this, she hissed at Marcus. You waited until you could publicly humiliate me. Marcus met her eyes without flinching. No, Mrs. Hendricks, you planned this when you decided to target my family's property because I wouldn't bow to you. I simply waited until you provided the perfect demonstration of why you shouldn't be in charge of anything more important than a parking space. He gathered his documents, tapping them into a neat stack. You have until Monday morning to submit your resignation and void those citations. After that, these documents become public record, and I suspect the next HOA meeting will be very well attended. He turned to address the room. And for everyone else, your power isn't going anywhere. My family has served this community for 60 years. We don't abandon people over personal disputes. But you deserve leadership that serves you, not someone who uses rules as weapons. Marcus picked up his folder and walked toward the exit. leaving Patricia standing alone at the head table, her kingdom suddenly empty. As the door closed behind him, he could hear the rising swell of questions and accusations filling the clubhouse. He climbed into his truck, set the folder on the passenger seat, and for the first time in 4 months, Marcus Brennan smiled with genuine satisfaction. Monday morning arrived with unusual silence. Marcus sat on his dock at dawn, coffee steaming in the cool October air, watching mist rise off the lake like ghosts dancing above water. His phone buzzed at 6:47 a.m. with an email from the HOA board's official address. Patricia Hendricks's resignation letter, terse and bitter, blaming personal health reasons for her departure. Attached was a second document voiding all 6 citations against his property, signed by Acting President Donald Webb. No apology, of course. Patricia wasn't capable of that kind of grace, but Marcus hadn't expected one. He'd wanted her gone, and she was gone. That was enough. He forwarded the emails to his attorney, archived them in 3 separate folders, and went back to watching the sunrise. His grandfather's dock lantern glowed warmly behind him, a small but stubborn beacon of family history that would stay exactly where it belonged. But Patricia's resignation triggered consequences neither of them had fully anticipated. By Tuesday afternoon, Marcus's doorbell was ringing. Constantly, Mrs. Chun from 3 houses down brought homemade dumplings and a story about Patricia threatening to fine her for excessive cooking odors unless she stopped using her outdoor grill. The Patterson family arrived with a 6-pack of craft beer and tallies of citations for their teenage son's basketball hoop, which Patricia claimed created recreational noise pollution. The Johnsons, the same couple whose mailbox Patricia had ignored, sheepishly admitted they paid her son's landscaping company $500 specifically to avoid citations. Over the next week, 17 different residents visited Marcus's home, each bringing stories of Patricia's shakedowns, favoritism, and petty tyrannies. Several had documentation. One had recordings of Patricia explicitly linking violation dismissals to using board-approved contractors, all of whom apparently paid her referral fees. What Marcus had thought was personal harassment against him turned out to be systematic abuse of the entire community. His confrontation hadn't just freed himself. He'd opened the floodgate of suppressed grievances. The October 22nd HOA meeting drew 93 residents, nearly every household in Clearwater Estates. Donald Webb, serving as temporary president, looked overwhelmed as people lined up at the microphone demanding investigations into Patricia's entire tenure. The full accounting took 6 weeks. A resident committee formed to review 3 years of Patricia's decisions, and what they uncovered made local news. Patricia had approved over $40,000 in emergency landscaping work to her son's company without competitive bidding. She created violation standards that specifically targeted homes using contractors who wouldn't pay her kickbacks. She personally pocketed security deposits from residents seeking architectural approval, then claimed the HOA had spent those funds on consulting fees that didn't exist. Most damning, she'd been preparing to recommend that Clearwater Estates switch from Brennan Power Solutions to a larger utility company where her brother-in-law worked in sales. A move that would have cost residents thousands in connection fees while netting her family a substantial commission. The evidence was overwhelming, documented in her own emails and financial records that the new board subpoenaed with resident backing. Patricia resigned from the board entirely in November, then quietly listed her house in December. By January, she'd moved out of Clearwater Estates completely, relocating to a condo development 40 miles away. Her husband, a quiet orthopedic surgeon who'd seemed perpetually exhausted by his wife's schemes, filed for divorce 2 months later. Their house sold in March for slightly below market value, buyers scared off by the property's reputation as the HOA scandal house. Marcus watched all of this unfold with mixed feelings. He'd wanted Patricia stopped, not destroyed. But he couldn't deny a certain satisfaction in seeing systematic corruption finally exposed. The new HOA president, Sarah Okonkwo, a retired corporate attorney who ran meetings with efficient fairness, visited Marcus in late November. She brought the original development agreement his grandfather had signed, now framed and mounted with a brass plaque recognizing the Brennan family's foundational role in Clearwater Lake's development. "This belongs in the clubhouse," she told him, "so every future board remembers where this community came from." Marcus hung the frame himself, positioning it where everyone entering board meetings would see it. The plaque read, "In recognition of Thomas Brennan, who built the foundation of our community in 1959, and whose family continues serving Clearwater Lake with integrity and dedication." It was a small thing, but it mattered. His grandfather's legacy, officially recognized instead of systematically erased. The December board meeting brought final resolution to Patricia's schemes. After reviewing 3 years of records, the HOA voted unanimously to ban board members from receiving any financial benefit from contractors or vendors serving the community. They established term limits, competitive bidding requirements, and a resident oversight committee with audit powers. They also voted to formally recognize all pre-existing structures built before 1983, ending any future attempts to regulate properties that predated the HOA itself. Marcus attended that meeting, standing when Sarah called his name, accepting the community's formal apology for Patricia's harassment. "You could have used your leverage to hurt all of us," Sarah said. "Instead, you exposed corruption and protected this community's interests. That's leadership." The room stood and applauded. 40 years of neighbors who'd watched Marcus grow up on these shores, who remembered his grandfather and father, who understood he'd fought not just for himself, but for the principles his family had built into this place. Marcus nodded, throat tight with emotion, then sat back down. He didn't want recognition. He just wanted to keep his grandfather's lantern burning. 2 months later, on a cold February evening, Marcus sat on his dock, bundled in his grandfather's wool coat, watching ice form in the shallows. The restored lantern cast warm light across weathered wood, the same light that had guided 3 generations of Brennan's home. His phone buzzed with the monthly utility report showing Clearwater Estate's power consumption. Every household connected to infrastructure his family maintained. Rates still 30% below regional averages because profit had never been his grandfather's goal. Service was. Community was. Integrity was. Marcus had learned those lessons watching his grandfather splice wire by hand, his father climb poles during storms. 3 generations of Brennan men who understood that real power wasn't about control or authority or forcing others to submit. Real power was building something that served others, maintaining it with pride, and refusing to let bullies tear it down. Patricia Hendricks had confused authority with power, titles with respect, fear with leadership. She'd lost everything trying to break a man whose strength came from family legacy and principle. Marcus had won without destroying anyone, simply by standing firm and letting corruption expose itself. As he sat there in peaceful silence, his grandfather's lantern burning steadily against the winter darkness, Marcus understood something fundamental. Justice doesn't always require revenge. Sometimes it just requires refusing to be intimidated, knowing your ground, and letting bullies defeat themselves. He smiled, poured coffee from his thermos, and watched stars reflect on black water. His grandfather would have been proud. His father would have laughed at Patricia's arrogance and inevitable fall. And Marcus, sitting on the dock his family had built with their own hands, felt the deep satisfaction of knowing some things, family, legacy, principle, couldn't be regulated, cited, or intimidated away. They simply endured, outlasting every petty tyrant who tried to tear them down. 2,000 miles west in Portland, Oregon, retired Navy Commander Lisa Torres received a parking citation from her condo association's new manager, Darren Burke, demanding she remove her wheelchair-accessible van because it exceeded approved vehicle length by 14 inches. Lisa read the citation twice, noting that Darren's own lifted pickup exceeded length limits by 3 feet but mysteriously remained unsighted. She smiled, the same calm smile that once preceded tactical operations in international waters. and pulled out her phone to call her daughter, who happened to be Oregon's Deputy Attorney General, specializing in disability discrimination law. "Darren," she said quietly when he answered, "you've just cited a decorated combat veteran's ADA-required vehicle. That's a federal offense. Would you like to discuss this before my daughter gets involved, or shall we make this educational?" The line went silent. But that's a story for another time.